Folks love to talk like age steals your sense, but mine never went nowhere. The day I stepped into that courthouse, every lie looked louder than the truth. I'm a grandmother from a small Midwest town where winters linger and folks mind each other's business behind polite smiles. After my son passed, my daughter-in-law took charge of what she called the details, and most everyone figured I was too old and tired to notice. They were wrong. The morning light came in sideways through the kitchen window, catching dust I hadn't noticed before. The house was quiet, but it felt like it was paying attention. Before I go on, let me say this gentle-like. If stories like this matter to you, if quiet truths deserve a place to land, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps voices like mine keep getting heard. Now, let me tell you what I saw. It started slow. That's how trouble likes to come. No knock, no warning. Just little shifts you don't notice till you do. I was sitting at the table with my coffee gone lukewarm, the kind of morning where the clock ticks louder than it should. The paper was spread out in front of me, same as always. Bills, church mail, a grocery flyer I never asked for, ordinary things. But something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just moved. A letter I remembered opening was back in the envelope. A bank statement was folded different, creased where I never crease things. I told myself I was tired, told myself age plays tricks. Still, I smoothed the paper flat with my palm and sat there a while longer than usual. Later that day, my daughter-in-law came by. She didn't knock, she never does anymore, just let herself in like the house belonged to her already. "Mom," she said, real loud, too loud, "you want some help with the mail?" Her voice had that careful brightness to it, the kind folks use when they're talking to toddlers or people they've already decided can't keep up. "I'm all right," I said. She smiled, not with her eyes. She gathered the papers anyway, tapping them into a neat stack quicker than necessary. I watched her hands, pretty hands, clean nails, no wedding ring anymore. She talked the whole time, about errands, about traffic, about how confusing paperwork can get at our age. I didn't answer much, didn't need to. The floor creaked when she leaned over the table, that old sound, like the house clearing its throat. When she left, the air felt thinner, like something had been taken with her. I sat back down and counted the papers again. One was missing. After that, things kept happening in ways small enough to excuse. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I entered rooms. Phones got turned face down. Folks leaned in close to each other, then stepped back when they noticed me. At the grocery store, Mrs. Handley patted my hand at the register. "Don't you worry yourself now. You've been through enough." Her eyes slid away before I could ask what she meant. At church, Pastor Miller asked if I was managing all right. Not how I was feeling, not how I was holding up. Managing. I nodded, smiled polite. People like neat stories. Old woman, dead son, helpful family stepping in. It makes 'em comfortable. I let 'em have that comfort, but I watched. My daughter-in-law started talking louder around me, drawing words out, repeating herself when I hadn't asked her to. "We already handled that," she'd say. "I told you yesterday." You probably don't remember. Sometimes she'd laugh after, soft, like it was all harmless. Once I caught my neighbor explaining something to her in hushed tones on the porch. When they saw me through the window, both of 'em straightened up like kids caught stealing cookies. I opened the door. "Oh," my neighbor said. "We were just checking in," my daughter-in-law finished. They smiled together. The porch boards felt cold under my bare feet. I stood there wrapped in my sweater, the one my son bought me 3 winters ago.
He liked to make sure I was warm. Funny thing is, nobody says his name much anymore. One afternoon, the mail came late. I know because I sit by the window most days. The truck finally pulled up just before dusk. I sorted through the envelopes slow, real slow. That's when I noticed something. An account I knew by heart, one I'd balanced in my head for years, was lower than it should have been. Not by a little, by enough to matter. I read the numbers again, then again. The light faded while I sat there, shadows stretching across the table like long fingers. I didn't panic, didn't cry. I made a note on a scrap of paper and slipped it into my apron pocket. Later that night, I checked another statement. Same feeling. Like a picture where something's been erased, but the outline is still there. I started paying attention to dates, names, signatures. My son's name used to be everywhere, on forms, on accounts, on things we built together. Now it showed up less and less, like it was being rubbed out gently so nobody would notice the friction. I asked once, just once, why ain't this name on this anymore? My daughter-in-law didn't look at me right away. She kept stirring the pot on the stove, scraping the bottom too hard. "Oh, that got changed," she said. "Legal stuff." "Changed to what?" She sighed, loud enough for me to hear the patience leaving her. "Mom, you don't need to worry about all that." The spoon clanged against the pot. I nodded, but my stomach stayed tight the rest of the night. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I lay in bed listening to the house breathe, the tick of cooling pipes, the distant hum of the fridge, the wind worrying the trees outside. I thought about all the years folks had underestimated me, thought quiet meant empty, thought slow meant simple. I remembered my mama saying, "Watch what people do when they think you ain't watching." In the dark, that felt like a hand on my shoulder. Days passed, then weeks. More papers shifted, more gentle redirections, more talk about what's best. I kept my mouth shut, but I started writing things down. Times, amounts, little changes. I hid the notebook behind the flour tin in the pantry. Every now and then I'd catch my daughter-in-law watching me. Not mean, not angry, calculating, like she was waiting for me to slip. One morning I found a document in the trash, torn clean in half like it'd been done careful. I smoothed it out on the counter. My son's name was there, or what was left of it. The paper smelled like coffee and something else, perfume maybe. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I folded the pieces together and slid them into my pocket. Outside, the sky was low and gray, the kind of day that presses on you. I stood at the sink a long time, watching water run over my hands. They looked old, still steady. That night, my daughter-in-law told me she had taken care of some things and I didn't need to trouble myself. She spoke real soft this time, almost kind. I watched her face while she talked, the way her jaw tightened just a touch when I didn't respond. She needed me to agree, needed me to disappear into the story she'd already written. I smiled, the kind smile that doesn't promise anything. After she left, I sat alone in the living room, lamp on low, quilt pulled over my knees, the one my son liked best. The house creaked again. I thought about all the things folks had decided for me without asking, all the places they assumed I couldn't see anymore. I looked at the doorway, the window, the quiet corners. I wasn't blind. Not to numbers, not to silence, not to the way people move when they think you're already gone. And as I sat there, listening to the clock mark time, one thought stayed with me, steady as breath. What else had they been counting on me not seeing?
The house sounded different once we came back from the cemetery. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The door shut behind us with a soft click, and that sound carried clear through every room. I stood there a moment longer than I meant to, coat still on, shoes dusty with dried mud from the graveyard. The air inside felt colder than it should have, even though the heater was running steady. My boy's picture still sat on the side table by the door, smiling. Same smile he had as a kid when he knew he was about to get away with something. I reached out and straightened the frame, though it wasn't crooked. The living room smelled like wilted flowers and leftover casseroles. Folks mean well, but grief don't care about aluminum pans and handwritten notes. Every chair felt too big. Every clock tick sounded sharp. My daughter-in-law moved through the house like she'd already memorized it, opening cabinets, closing drawers, picking up plates folks had dropped off. "You go sit, Mom," she said, real gentle. "I got this." Her voice was calm, steady, too steady. I sat because my legs felt heavy, not because she told me to. The couch dipped the same way it always had. The quilt lay folded over the arm, still holding the faint smell of my son's soap. She came back from the kitchen with 2 glasses of sweet tea, set one in front of me, like she'd done it 100 times before. "Drink some," she said. "You need your strength." I wrapped my hands around the glass. It was sweating cold against my palms. I didn't sip yet. She sat across from me, smoothing her skirt, and laid a stack of papers on the coffee table, neat, aligned, too prepared for a house that had just buried someone. "Just a few things we need to take care of," she said. "Nothing big." The words floated between us, light as dust. I looked at the papers, but didn't touch 'em. "What things?" I asked. She smiled that careful smile again, soft at the edges, practiced. "Oh, you know, accounts, bills, legal stuff. I didn't want you worrying yourself over it right now." Right now, like worry had an expiration date. She slid the papers closer. Her fingernails clicked quiet against the glass tabletop. I noticed the top page first. My son's name was there, or part of it, typed smaller than I remembered. The room felt tight. "I can read," I said. "I know, Mom," she replied quick, too quick. "I just mean it's a lot, and you've been through so much." She reached for my hand. I let her take it, felt how warm hers was compared to mine. Grief does that, makes your blood move slower. She talked while holding my hand, about responsibilities, about how things get messy if you wait, about how she just wanted to make it easier for me. Her thumb rubbed small circles on my knuckles, like comfort could distract from ink and signatures. I pulled my hand back. "I'll look at 'em later," I said. Her smile flickered, just for a second. "Well, some of this really ought to be handled soon," she said, still gentle. "Deadlines and all." Deadlines. My son hadn't even been in the ground a full day. I picked up my tea and took a sip. It was too sweet, made my throat ache. "I ain't signing nothing today," I said. She let out a small laugh, light and breathy. "Of course not. I wouldn't expect you to." But she didn't move the papers away. We sat like that a while, the clock on the wall ticking, the refrigerator humming. Outside, a car passed slow, tires hissing on damp pavement. I could hear my son's laugh in my head, clear as day. He always said quiet was louder than noise if you listened right. She finally gathered the papers back into a stack. "We'll come back to it," she said, "when you're feeling stronger." When, not if. She stood and went back into the kitchen, talking the whole way, about funeral arrangements, about thank you notes, about how tired she was too.
I watched her from the couch, the way she moved, like she belonged there already. That night I slept in fits. The bed felt too big without the weight of worry on the other side. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dirt hitting the casket, heard it, felt it in my chest. Grief makes your body ache in places you didn't know could hurt. Sometime before dawn, I got up and walked the hallway. My feet knew the way without light. Past my boy's room, the door still closed like he might want privacy. I didn't open it. In the kitchen, the stack of papers sat on the counter where she'd left 'em. I stood there in my nightgown, hands folded, just looking. I didn't touch 'em. Not yet. Over the next few days, she came by more often, always with something to take care of, a bill, a form, a phone call she needed to make on my behalf. She spoke for me when others were around. "She's resting," she'd say. "She doesn't need to be bothered. I'll handle it." People nodded, looked at me with soft eyes, like I was already fading away. I smiled polite. She poured sweet tea every time, same glasses, same tone, calm, reassuring, and always the papers. They changed, too. New ones, different ones, some with sticky notes marking where signatures ought to go. I started noticing how she angled them so the lines faced me first. I kept noticing. One afternoon, I asked her straight, "Why the hurry?" She paused, pitcher halfway back to the fridge. "I just don't want things to pile up," she said. "It's better this way." "For who?" I asked. She blinked, took a breath, set the pitcher down slow. "For everyone," she said. Her eyes slid away from mine. I nodded and didn't push, didn't need to. The answer sat heavy enough between us. Grief does make you tired. Lord knows it does. But it sharpens other parts of you, makes you listen harder, makes you remember how folks act when they think you're weak. I remembered my son teaching me how to balance accounts years ago, sitting at this same table, tapping the paper with his pen. "Don't rush," he'd say. "Rushing's how mistakes happen." That memory stayed with me every time she smiled and said there was no time. The house stayed hollow, but not empty. It watched. So did I. I didn't sign a thing. Not that week, not the next. And every time she asked again, sweeter than before, one question kept circling my mind, steady and quiet. Why was she rushing so fast?
Rain came down steady that afternoon. Not hard, just enough to soak the ground and darken the sky. The kind of rain that makes the house feel smaller, like it's leaning in to listen. I sat at the kitchen table with my old reading glasses perched low on my nose, the ones with the thin metal arms, bent a little crooked from years of being set down wherever I happened to be standing. I hadn't worn 'em much lately. Folks assumed that meant I couldn't. The mail sat in a quiet stack to my right, not the fresh kind she liked to sort for me, but the pieces she thought I'd already tossed, the ones she didn't bother checking behind. I kept those. The table smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I'd left the pot on too long earlier, lost in thought, watching the rain slide down the window in slow, uneven lines. Outside, the yard was turning dark and slick, soil breathing up that damp, earthy smell I'd known all my life. I put one paper in front of me and smoothed it flat with my palm. Numbers don't scare me. Never did. I'd balanced books when money was tight and babies were small. I'd counted pennies at this same table, teaching my son the difference between want and need. Numbers have a way of telling on people if you let 'em talk long enough. I ran my finger down the page, slow, careful. Something didn't sit right. I checked the date, then the amount, then the name at the top. I leaned back and looked again just to be sure my eyes weren't playing tricks. Folks like to think that's what happens first, that sight goes before sense. But the numbers stayed put. A withdrawal I didn't remember approving, a transfer that hadn't been there the month before, small enough not to raise alarms, but big enough to matter if you knew where to look. I turned the page. Another statement, another quiet shift. My finger traced the ink like it might warm up and explain itself. The rain tapped the window in a soft, patient rhythm. I reached for my notebook from the drawer, the one hidden behind the dish towels, and wrote down the amounts, lined them up neat. They lined up too well. Dollars don't move on their own. They get carried. The room felt heavier as that thought settled in. I stood and poured myself another cup of coffee, though I didn't really want it. Habit, I guess. The mug was warm in my hands, grounding. When I sat back down, the chair creaked like it always had, like it remembered other hard afternoons. I turned to a different envelope. This one had to do with the property, the land my husband and I had paid off years ago, the house my son grew up in. I knew every corner of it, every creak in the floorboards. The paper said something else. Not wrong exactly, just changed. I read it twice, then a third time. A name was missing. Not crossed out, just gone, replaced with language that felt colder, less personal. My son's name should have been there. I swallowed and felt my heart thump once, slow and heavy, like it was knocking from the inside. I closed my eyes a moment, not long enough to rest, just long enough to steady myself. Grief makes everything ache, even truth. When I opened my eyes again, the paper hadn't changed, still said what it said. I lined it up next to an older copy I'd kept. Same form, same address, different names. That's when the silence in the room started to feel loud. I thought back over the past weeks, the way my daughter-in-law talked gentle while steering conversations away from details, the way papers always showed up already stacked, already marked, the way she said things like, "It's just easier this way." Easier for who? The rain picked up a little, drumming faster on the roof. The smell of wet soil crept in stronger through the cracked window above the sink. I liked that smell, always had. It reminded me that things buried don't stay hidden forever. I turned another page. More careful changes, more quiet movements, like someone tiptoeing through a room confident the floor won't squeak. But floors always squeak if you know where to step. My heart didn't race. That surprised me. It stayed slow, steady, heavy as an old clock. Each beat felt deliberate, like it was marking something important. I wasn't angry yet, just alert. Later that afternoon, I heard the door open. Footsteps. Familiar. She came in, shaking rain from her coat, talking before she even saw me. "Lord, it's coming down out there," she said. "I almost slipped on the porch." I didn't answer right away. She noticed the papers then, the glasses. She stopped. "Oh," she said, "I didn't know you kept all that." "I like to read my mail," I said. She smiled, not quite steady. "You know most of that's already handled," she said. "No need to stress yourself." I tapped the paper in front of me. "Can you tell me why this looks different?" I asked. She leaned in, squinting, playing along. "Looks the same to me." I slid the older copy out from under it. She straightened up. "That's just paperwork. Legal wording changes all the time. Names don't."
I replied. There it was, a pause. Not long, but long enough. She smoothed her coat like she needed something to do with her hands. I told you, she said, softer now, I'm taking care of things. I looked at her, really looked. She was tired, that much was true. Grief had worn on her, too. But beneath that was something else, a tightness around her mouth, a careful distance in her eyes. I folded the paper and set it aside. I ain't accusing, I'm asking. She nodded too fast. Well, I'll bring by the updated copies later so you don't get confused. Confused. She said it like a kindness. I didn't stop her when she left. After the door shut, the house settled again. Rain softened back to a whisper. The clock ticked on. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and tied them with string from the drawer, the same string I'd used for recipes and seed packets years ago. Some things don't need fancy tools. I slid the bundle into the cabinet behind the flower. Then I sat back down and stared at the window. My reflection looked older than I felt, lines deeper, eyes tired, but they were clear. That evening I made soup and let it simmer longer than necessary. The smell filled the house, warm and steady. I ate alone, listening to the radio low. Between songs, the announcer talked about weather moving through, about flooding in low areas. Water has a way of finding weak spots. After dinner, I took the papers back out and checked 'em one more time. Dates, amounts, names. Everything lined up too neatly to be accidental. Mistakes are messy. This wasn't. This was careful. I lay in bed that night listening to the rain start up again, harder now. It rattled the gutters and drummed against the windows like fingers tapping impatiently. I thought about trust, how it doesn't break loud. It thins first, stretches, gets transparent. I thought about how people rush when they think time is on their side. My heart beat slow and sure in the bark, and one question stayed with me, pressing gentle but firm like rain against glass. If this was a mistake, how did it feel so careful?
The first time I noticed it, it wasn't what they said. It was how their voices changed when I opened my mouth. It happened in the lawyer's office, a place that smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, the kind of clean that tries too hard. I sat in a stiff chair across from a desk too wide for honest talk, my purse folded neat in my lap. I asked a simple question, just one. Can you explain this part to me again? The lawyer smiled, polite, tight. Well, he said, leaning back, it's a bit complicated. Complicated always means you wouldn't understand. He started using bigger words after that, long sentences that wandered before landing nowhere useful. He talked slow, but not careful, like he was filling time, not meaning. My daughter-in-law sat beside him, nodding along. She's been through a lot, she said, glancing at me without really looking. We don't want to overwhelm her. Overwhelm her. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger yet, something colder. I'm right here, I said. They both paused. Oh, of course, the lawyer replied, smiling again. Didn't mean it like that. But he did. After that, it started happening everywhere. At church, conversations softened when I walked up. Folks leaned closer to each other, like I might catch something contagious if they spoke too loud. Oh, honey, Mrs. Caldwell said one Sunday, squeezing my arm, you just focus on healing now. Healing from what, exactly? At the grocery store, the cashier asked if I needed help counting my change. I hadn't.
Neighbors stopped asking my opinion on town matters, things I'd been part of for years, committees, decisions, little stuff that made you feel useful. They smiled kind, looked past me quicker. I started feeling like furniture, something familiar folks walk around without thinking. My daughter-in-law sighed more often, long, patient sighs, the kind meant to teach you shame without raising a voice. "Mom," she'd say, rubbing her forehead, "you don't need to stress yourself with all this." Stress. She said it every time I asked about papers, every time I mentioned numbers, every time I wanted something explained plain. Once she set her hand on my shoulder and said, "You've done enough." Enough of what? Living? I watched her closely then, the way she pressed her lips together when I didn't agree, the way her eyes hardened just a touch when I didn't back down. She wanted compliance. Concern was just the wrapping. One afternoon, someone said it out loud. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight slanting through the window, dust dancing slow in the air. She had a folder open between us, pages marked with sticky notes. "I really think you should let this go," she said softly, "for your own good." For your own good. The words landed wrong, sharp as a stone in the shoe. I looked at her, really looked. My hands were spotted now, knuckles stiff some mornings, but they were the same hands that fed babies, hauled water, signed paychecks, lowered a coffin into the ground. "For whose good?" I asked. She smiled like I misunderstood. "Yours," she said. "You don't need all this trouble." Trouble. That word sat heavy. I thought about my husband then, about the day I buried him, how I'd stood at that grave with dirt under my nails and kids clinging to my skirt. Nobody asked me to let that go. I thought about the fields I worked beside him, sunburned arms, early mornings, late nights. Nobody worried about my stress then. I'd raised a family, paid bills, kept a house standing through winters that cracked pipes and summers that burned crops dry. I'd lived a whole life before most of these folks learned how to tie their shoes. But suddenly, I was fragile. Suddenly, my questions were dangerous. The lawyer called a few days later. He spoke slow, too slow. "You just want what's best for you," he said. "Dragging things out can be taxing." Taxing, like truth was a burden instead of a right. "I ain't dragging nothin', I'm asking." Silence on the line. "Well," he said finally, "sometimes families need to make decisions." Families. I pictured my son, his laugh, his stubborn streak, the way he hated shortcuts. I hung up without saying goodbye. After that, the softness turned sharper around the edges. People started speaking around me instead of to me, making plans without mentioning them, using phrases like, "We've decided," and "It's already handled." Handled, decided. I felt myself shrinking in their eyes, even while I stood tall. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the dismissal. Like my mind had an expiration date I'd somehow missed. One night, I sat alone with the lights low, listening to the wind scrape the siding. The house felt old but steady, like me. I thought about how control wears a friendly face, how it uses kindness like a leash. I thought about how folks get uncomfortable when you don't play the part they wrote for you. The obedient widow, the grateful mother, the quiet old woman. I wasn't loud, wasn't rude. I just wouldn't disappear. The next time someone told me to let it go, I smiled. A small smile, calm. "I didn't hold on to this life by accident," I said, "and I ain't letting go just because it's convenient." They didn't know what to say after that. Their silence told me more than their concern ever had. Lying in bed later, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow, one thought settled deep and sure. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were worried about my attention. And since when did concern sound so much like control?
The house was asleep when I finally stood up. Lights off, clock ticking slow. Even the floorboards sounded careful. It was late enough that the world outside had gone still. No cars passing, no dogs barking down the road, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint whistle of wind slipping under the back door. I hadn't planned on getting up, but some nights rest won't come unless you listen to what's knocking inside you. I walked down the hallway barefoot, the carpet cool beneath my feet. Every step felt deliberate, like the house was watching to see if I'd change my mind. My son's door stood closed at the end, same as it had since the day he left and never came back. I stood there a moment, hand hovering near the knob. Didn't open it. Instead, I turned toward the small room off the hall, the one that used to be half office, half storage, the room folks forget about because it doesn't ask for much. The light switch clicked louder than I expected. The room smelled like old paper and dust, familiar, safe in a way. The desk sat where it always had, scarred from years of use. In the corner was the file cabinet, gray metal, 2 drawers, dented on the side from when my son moved it in by himself. The bottom drawer was the one. I knelt down, joints complaining quiet, and wrapped my fingers around the handle. It was cold, always was. He kept it locked. I remembered teasing him about that once. "What you hiding in there?" I'd asked. "Just things that matter," he'd said, not looking up. "In case." In case. The drawer stuck when I pulled. It always did, like it wanted you to mean it. I tugged harder. The metal groaned, then slid open with a low scrape that sounded too loud in the quiet house. Inside were folders, neat, labeled in his handwriting, the one I'd seen on birthday cards, grocery lists, notes stuck to the fridge. My chest tightened. I pulled the first folder free. Deeds. I recognized the addresses right away. Land we'd talked about over coffee. Property he'd worked extra shifts to help pay off. Everything dated, signed, proper. Nothing sloppy, nothing rushed. My hands moved slow, respectful, like I was touching something fragile. The next folder held notes, short ones, written to himself. Reminders, thoughts, questions he hadn't had time to answer yet. And then there was the envelope. Plain. No stamp, just my name on the front. Mama. My knees gave out right then. I sat back on the floor, papers spreading around me like fallen leaves. The cold crept up through the thin carpet and into my bones, but I didn't move. I opened the envelope with careful fingers. The letter was folded once, just once. He always folded things neat. His handwriting filled the page, steady, familiar, a little slanted to the right. I didn't read it right away. I just held it. The room felt smaller, like it was leaning in close. When I finally started reading, my breath caught. "Mama, if you're reading this, something's gone sideways. I hope it hasn't, but if it has, I need you to trust what you see." My throat burned. He'd planned, not in fear, in care. The letter wasn't long. He didn't waste words. He never did. He explained what belonged to who, what he'd set aside, what he'd noticed changing before he died. Names, dates, concerns he hadn't had time to say out loud. And then, near the bottom, "If anybody tells you none of this exists, they're lying. I put it where you'd find it. You always do." My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, smearing dust across my skin. I wasn't crying loud, just leaking. The house stayed quiet.
I sat there on the floor a long while, letter in my lap, surrounded by proof folks said wasn't real, proof they spoke soft about, proof they smiled around. It was all there, solid, undeniable. I stacked the folders back in order, just like he'd kept 'em, slid the letter back into its envelope and tucked it inside the deed folder. The metal drawer waited. Before closing it, I rested my hand on the edge. "Thank you," I whispered. The drawer slid shut with a soft, final sound. I stayed on the floor longer than my knees liked. The cold worked its way deeper, but I welcomed it. Kept me present, kept me from drifting off into memory too much. Eventually, I stood and turned off the light. The hallway felt different walking back, less heavy, like something had shifted its weight. I didn't sleep much after that, lay in bed listening to the house breathe. Every now and then I pressed my hand flat against my chest, feeling my heart beat steady, slow, sure. The next morning came gray and quiet. Frost clung to the edges of the windows. I made coffee and let it sit, untouched, while I stared at the wall. I thought about the letter, about my son trusting me to remember. I thought about the way people talked when they thought truth was too much for me. I thought about the question I couldn't shake now. Would anyone listen to an old woman holding papers, or would I have to make 'em? Later that day, my daughter-in-law called. "Just checking in," she said. "You doing all right?" "I'm fine," I replied. There was a pause. "We'll need to finalize a few things soon, so everything's settled." Settled. I looked toward the hallway, toward the room with the file drawer. "Not yet," I said. Her breath caught just a little. "Well, we don't want things dragging on," she said carefully. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Some things are worth the time," I replied. She didn't argue, hung up not long after that. That evening, I opened the file drawer again, took out one folder, just one. The letter stayed inside. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it down. The wood felt solid beneath my fingers. I didn't rush, didn't panic. I made a list of questions, names of people who might still remember me as more than a liability. The house watched. So did my son, in whatever way sons do after they're gone. As night settled in again, I tied the folder with string and slipped it into my bag, the one I carried to church, to town, to places where folks still nodded like I mattered. I sat by the window and looked out at the dark yard. The truth didn't glow, didn't hum. It just was. Quiet, heavy, real. And as the moon climbed higher, one last question pressed in, steady as my pulse. Would anyone listen to an old woman holding papers, or would I have to make 'em?
The courthouse smelled like old polish and tired air, like something trying hard to stay respectable. My shoes sounded louder than they should have against the floor. I paused just inside the door, letting my eyes adjust. Tall windows, pale light, dust hanging where folks didn't bother to look up. Everything felt bigger than me, but not heavier. I'd carried heavier things than this. I straightened my coat and walked on. Each step echoed, not sharp, just enough to remind me I was being heard whether I meant to be or not. Funny thing was, I didn't feel small. My heart beat slow and even, like it always did when I knew where I stood. They were already there. My daughter-in-law sat 2 rows up, hands folded neat in her lap. Her hair was done just right, the kind of right meant to say, put together. She didn't turn when I came in, didn't need to, she knew. Her lawyer sat beside her, leaning back easy, one arm draped over the chair like he owned the place.
He smiled when he saw me, not friendly, confident. That smile told me everything. I took my seat without rushing, set my bag down careful at my feet. The bench felt hard through my coat, but solid. I rested my hands on my knees and waited. The room filled up slow, folks whispering, papers rustling, a cough here and there. Someone cleared their throat like they were nervous for me. I wasn't. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The case started like all things do, with words trying to sound important. Procedures, background, context. My name said like it belonged to someone else. I watched my daughter-in-law's lawyer talk, watched how he used his hands, wide gestures meant to take up space. He spoke smooth, confident, like this was already decided. "She's been through a great loss," he said, nodding in my direction. "We're simply trying to protect her interests." Protect. I felt my jaw tighten just a little. He talked about efficiency, about clarity, about how families need to move forward. He never once said my son's name. I noticed that. When he finished, he sat back down with the same thin smile. My daughter-in-law finally looked at me then, just a glance, quick, measuring. The judge turned toward me. "Ma'am," he said, "you may speak." That was it. No fanfare, no rush. I stood. The floor felt cool under my shoes. I held my bag close, not tight, just steady. "I won't take long," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised a few folks. I could tell by the way heads lifted. "I'm not here to argue," I continued. "I'm here to show." I reached into my bag and pulled out the first folder, brown, worn, tied with string. I walked up and laid it on the table in front of me, smoothed it flat. Then another and another, each one placed careful, orderly, like setting a table. The lawyer's smile twitched. "These are copies," I said. "Originals are filed where they belong." I didn't look at my daughter-in-law when I spoke. I didn't need to. "These papers show what was moved, when it was moved, and who signed for it." I opened one folder and turned it toward the judge. I didn't explain much. Let the paper talk. Dates lined up. Numbers didn't lie. The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears. The judge leaned forward. My daughter-in-law shifted in her seat. I pulled out the letter last. Didn't open it. This was written by my son before he passed. The word passed felt softer than the truth, but it would do. He trusted me to hold on to it, and I did. I laid the envelope down. No tears, no trembling, just paper meeting wood. The lawyer stood up quick. "Your Honor." The judge lifted a hand. "Let me read," he said, and he did. Time slowed then, not in a dramatic way, just stretched thin like taffy pulled careful. I watched faces change while he read. The lawyer's confidence drained first. His foot started tapping. He cleared his throat once, then stopped. My daughter-in-law stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. The judge turned pages slow, careful, like he was aware of the weight of what he held. I stood there the whole time, didn't sit, didn't shift. The floor felt firm beneath me. When the questions came, they weren't for me. "Can you explain this transfer?" the judge asked. "Well," he began, voice not as smooth now, "there was an understanding." "Show me," the judge said. Papers shuffled, whispers started up, then died down quick. My daughter-in-law leaned in, whispering something urgent. The lawyer nodded too fast. I watched them, not with anger, with clarity. This was the part where truth does its quiet work. The lawyer tried again, different angle, same soft words. "She's elderly," he said, confused by the process. The judge looked up at me. "You confused?" he asked. "No, sir," I replied. Simple. That did it. The lawyer swallowed. His confidence slipped right there like he'd stepped on ice he didn't see. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. More reading, more questions. Each answer they gave tangled itself tighter. I thought about all the times folks had told me to let it go for my own good. I thought about how they spoke soft, like volume could change facts. The courtroom stayed still. No phones buzzing, no coughs now, just paper and breath and truth laid bare. Eventually, the judge leaned back. "I've seen enough for today," he said. He looked at my daughter-in-law, then at her lawyer. "This matter will proceed with full review." Full review. Those words settled over the room like dust after something breaks. My daughter-in-law finally looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were wide, searching. I met her gaze and held it. Not hard, not angry, just steady. We were dismissed not long after. I gathered my folders back into my bag, tying the string neat again. My hands moved easy, familiar. As I turned to leave, I heard the lawyer say something sharp under his breath. Didn't catch it, didn't care. The hallway felt longer on the way out, quieter too. My steps still echoed, but now they sounded like they belonged. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I stood there for a moment, letting it fill my lungs. I felt tired, but lighter, like something I'd been carrying a long time had finally been set down where others could see it. As I walked toward the parking lot, I thought about that smile the lawyer had worn when I first walked in. How sure he was. How folks get when they think age equals weakness. Confidence can slip real fast when it's built on silence. And as the courthouse doors closed behind me, one thought stayed with me, clear as breath in winter. Why did their confidence start slipping right then? Because truth don't need raising voices. It just needs room.
The room changed the moment the judge stopped talking. Not loud, not sudden, just still. He leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting on the desk, papers spread out in front of him like a map he was finally willing to study. The ticking clock on the wall felt louder now, each second landing heavy in the quiet. His eyes moved slower with each page. That's when I knew. Not because he frowned, not because he sighed, because he paused. Judges don't pause unless something's caught. I stayed standing where I was, hands folded low in front of me. My legs ached a little, but I didn't mind. The floor felt solid, like it was holding me up on purpose. Across the room, my daughter-in-law sat stiff, too stiff. Her shoulders were squared, posture perfect, like she'd practiced this moment in her head and still didn't trust it. Her hands rested in her lap. They were trembling, just a touch, enough to notice if you were looking. The lawyer shifted in his chair, crossed one leg, then uncrossed it, cleared his throat, quiet but sharp in the stillness. The judge turned a page. Silence stretched. I could hear my own breathing, slow, even. The hum of the lights overhead buzzed faint like they were tired too. The judge looked up. "Explain this," he said. Not to me. The lawyer stood up quick, too quick. Papers slid from his folder, edges catching. He gathered them back with a nervous chuckle. "Of course, Your Honor," he said.
What you're seeing here is—" He stopped. Started again. What happened was, the words came out tangled now, not smooth like before. He talked about timing, about misunderstandings, about intentions. Intentions don't show up on paper. The judge didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes steady, waiting. The lawyer kept talking, sentences stacking up on top of each other, each one weaker than the last. I glanced at my daughter-in-law. Her jaw was tight, lips pressed thin. She stared straight ahead, blinking slower than normal, like she was afraid to move too much. Her foot tapped once, then stopped. The judge held up a finger. "Answer the question," he said. One sentence. The lawyer swallowed. "Well," he said, voice cracking just enough to hear, "there was an understanding within the family." "Show me," the judge replied. 2 words. That's all it took. The lawyer shuffled through the papers again. This time his hands weren't steady. Pages slipped sideways. He paused, then tried a different stack. "There isn't a single document here that supports what you're claiming," the judge continued. The air felt heavier, like the room itself had leaned in closer. My daughter-in-law's fingers curled into her skirt. I didn't move. The judge turned another page. "Why was this account altered without consent?" he asked. Silence. The lawyer opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "It was assumed—" "By whom?" the judge asked. The lawyer glanced at my daughter-in-law. Just a flicker, but it was enough. The judge noticed too. He turned his attention to her. "Ma'am, did you authorize this?" She shifted in her seat, cleared her throat. I was just trying to help," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Help whom?" the judge asked. She didn't answer right away. I watched her chest rise and fall faster than before. "My mother-in-law," she said. She's been grieving." The word grieving hung in the air, heavy, useful. The judge looked at me, then back at her. "Did she ask you to do this?" No answer. The silence stretched long enough to hurt. That kind of silence don't rush you. It waits, makes room for truth to trip over itself. The lawyer stepped in again, voice urgent now. "Your Honor, emotions were high and decisions had to be made quickly." "Quickly for whom?" the judge cut in. Another pause. I could feel eyes shifting in the room, people leaning forward just a bit, the sound of a chair creaking somewhere behind me. The judge set the papers down, flat. He said, "That explanation doesn't hold." My daughter-in-law's hands were shaking more now. She tried to still them by pressing her palms together. It didn't work. I thought about all the times she'd spoken for me, all the times she'd said I didn't need to worry, all the softness in her voice that masked something sharp underneath. This was what it looked like when pretending stopped working. The questions kept coming, one by one, clear, precise, sharp. Why was this deed revised? Why was this transfer made without notification? Why was this name removed? Each answer came slower, less confident. The lawyer's voice lost its rhythm, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. He leaned on words like confusion and oversight and good intentions. The judge leaned on facts. Facts don't bend for feelings. At one point, the lawyer tried again. "She's elderly," he said. "She may not recall agreeing to certain things." The judge looked up at me. "Do you recall?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. 2 words. Steady. The lawyer's shoulders sagged just a bit. That was the moment.
Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet collapse of a story that couldn't stand up anymore. The judge took a long breath and removed his glasses, set them carefully on the desk. "I don't see any evidence of consent here," he said. "What I do see is a pattern." Pattern. That word settled deep. My daughter-in-law bowed her head just slightly, her shoulders slumped, posture finally giving up the fight. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory, release. The room stayed quiet while the judge wrote notes in the margin of one document. His pen scratched slow across the page. I stood there, hands still folded, feeling the ache in my legs and the steadiness in my spine. I thought about my son, about how he'd trusted me to hold on to things that mattered. I thought about all the times people spoke soft, thinking softness could hide sharp edges. The judge looked up again. "This court will proceed with a full review," he said. "Until then, no further changes are to be made." No further changes. The lawyer nodded quickly, too quickly. My daughter-in-law didn't move. When it was over, when the judge finally stood and left the room, the silence broke like ice thawing. Chairs shifted, people whispered again. I gathered my papers slow, careful, same way I'd laid them out. As I tucked them back into my bag, I felt eyes on me. Not pity this time, recognition. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. In the hallway outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner, like the building itself had exhaled. My daughter-in-law passed me without speaking. Her heels clicked sharp against the floor, pace quicker than before. The lawyer followed, head down, already dialing his phone. I stood there a moment longer, listening to the echo of footsteps fade. My hands were steady. My heart beat slow and sure. On the way out, I paused near the big front doors. Sunlight spilled across the floor, bright and honest. I thought about pretending, how it works real well when nobody's paying attention, how it falls apart the second someone stops nodding along. What happens when pretending don't work no more? People get quiet, stories crack, truth takes up space. I stepped outside and let the cold air fill my lungs. Behind me, the courthouse doors closed with a solid sound. Final. And for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel heavy.
The ruling didn't come with a bang. No raised voices, no gavel slammed hard enough to scare anyone. It came quiet, steady, like a door closing the way it's meant to, firm, final, and without apology. The judge read it plain, no extra words, no softness meant to soothe feelings, just facts laid where they belonged. What was taken would be returned. What was shifted would be corrected. My name would go back where it had always been. I stood there listening, hands folded, breath slow. The words washed over me, gentle but sure, like sunlight creeping across a floor in the morning. You don't hear it happen. You just notice the dark is gone. My daughter-in-law didn't look at me when it ended. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The lawyer gathered his papers fast, too fast, edges bent and corners creased. Confidence doesn't pack up neat when it leaves. The judge nodded once toward me, just once. That was enough. Outside the courthouse, folks shifted out of the way as I passed. Not rude, just careful, like they didn't quite know where to place me now that I wasn't who they thought I was. Some wouldn't meet my eyes.
Some nodded stiff. A few looked embarrassed. I didn't mind. I walked slow, letting my feet find their own rhythm. The hallway smelled like old air and something clean underneath it. Maybe polish. Maybe relief. Each step felt lighter than the last, though my body was just as old as it had been that morning. Funny how weight can lift without anything physically changing. When I pushed open the courthouse doors, daylight spilled in wide and honest. Cold air brushed my cheeks, sharp and real. I stopped just outside. The sky was clear, no clouds, no hurry. I stood there a moment, eyes closed, letting the sun warm my face like it used to when I worked the fields. Same sun, same heat, different season. Behind me, the doors shut with a solid sound. Done. I walked down the steps alone, not lonely, just alone. The parking lot was half full, cars parked crooked, windshields flashing sunlight. Somewhere off in the distance, a truck backfired. Life going on same as it always does. I reached my car and rested my hand on the door before opening it. The metal felt cool, solid. I took a breath. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not stared at, not managed. Seen. Word travels fast in small towns, faster than truth sometimes, but this time they moved together. By the time I got home, the phone had already rung twice. I didn't answer, let it ring itself tired. I made coffee instead, sat at the table, let the steam rise slow. The house felt different, lighter somehow, like it had been waiting for this too. I walked through each room after, touching familiar things. The back of the couch, the door frame with pencil marks still faint from when my boy was small, the kitchen counter worn smooth from years of hands and work. Everything was where it belonged. So was I. Later that afternoon, I went into town for groceries. Nothing fancy. Bread, milk, apples. People noticed me. Not the way they had before. Mrs. Hanley looked up from the produce section and froze just a second too long before smiling. "Afternoon," she said. "Afternoon," I replied. Her eyes didn't slide away this time. At the register, the cashier rang me up without offering help I hadn't asked for. Counted change quiet, respectful. It was small, but it mattered. Outside, the wind cut sharp across the lot. I pulled my coat tighter and smiled to myself. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun went down, painting the yard gold and then gray. Shadows stretched across the field. Birds settled in for the night. I thought about everything I'd walked through. The loss, the silence, the way folks spoke soft like it was kindness. I thought about how many times I'd been strong without naming it. How many things I'd survived without stopping to notice. Raising children on not enough sleep and less money. Burying a husband and still getting up the next morning. Working land that didn't always love you back. Seeing when others hoped you wouldn't. The truth didn't make me feel proud. It made me feel settled, like something inside me had clicked back into place. I reached for the quilt and pulled it over my knees. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and thyme. I whispered my son's name into the quiet. Didn't need an answer. That night, before bed, I opened the file drawer one last time, looked at the folders, the letter, everything in its proper place. I didn't need to touch 'em any more. I closed the drawer and turned off the light. Lying in bed, listening to the house settle, I felt a tiredness that wasn't heavy, the good kind, earned. My mind drifted back over years I'd walked through without stopping to acknowledge what I'd seen, what I'd known, what I'd carried. Age hadn't dulled me. It had sharpened me. I smiled in the dark. I might be old, but I ain't blind, and now the whole town knew it. As sleep finally came, one last thought rested easy in my chest, warm and steady as breath. What else had I survived that I never gave myself credit for seeing? If you feel comfortable, I'd appreciate it if you left a like on this video. It helps these quiet stories reach the people who might need 'em most. You can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about love, endurance, and the things we carry longer than we should. And if you want to, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read 'em, truly. Knowing this story traveled farther than my living room gives me more comfort than you might imagine. Thank you for sitting with me. Take care of yourself and take care of the people you love.